Hello and welcome to Stuff That Interests Me with me, Dominic Frisby. Well, in 2011, if we'd all listened to this man, none of us would ever have to work again. His name is Roger Ver. He's a businessman and an investor, American-born, but has since renounced his citizenship and is a national of St. Kitts. The reason we should have listened? Not only was he an early investor in Bitcoin, perhaps more significantly, he was one of Bitcoin's early champions. There are videos of him from August 2011, when Bitcoin was about $10, challenging people to bet him $10,000 that Bitcoin would outperform gold, silver, the US stock market, and the US dollar by more than 100 times. He updated the bet in 2012 when Bitcoin was only up 11%, calling Bitcoin the most important invention in the history of humankind since the internet. Today, Bitcoin sits at over $7,000, some 700 times higher. He won the bet many times over. His Bitcoin evangelism has led him to be known as Bitcoin Jesus, and I'm delighted to be sitting with him now. Roger Ver, welcome to the show. Congratulations. Why don't we start with, who coined that name, Bitcoin Jesus? How did it come about?
I think the first time I remember anybody referring to me with that name, which, to be honest, I'm not such a big fan of. Things didn't work out so well for the original Jesus, but I was at a barbecue in Washington State. And this was probably 2012, maybe early 2013. And I was telling a whole bunch of high school kids that had come over from the neighboring house to the barbecue about Bitcoin and explaining how it works and setting them all up with wallets on their phones. And, kids, digital money on the internet doesn't seem that strange to them. So they were naturally, oh, this is great. And, a lot of them were probably too young to even open a bank account or get a credit card, but they realized that with Bitcoin, it doesn't matter how old you are, right? And so they were loving it. And there were maybe, a dozen kids around me in a circle all listening enthusiastically. And one of the adults looked on and he said, Roger, it's like you're a Bitcoin Jesus and you have all of your disciples around you. And I think that was probably the first time I remember anybody saying something like that.
It's one of the things that's kind of characterized this whole Bitcoin movement is it's always had this sort of undercurrent of comedy to it and along with the anarchy. I suppose it's fair to say you're less keen on Bitcoin now than you were, and you've become more keen on Bitcoin Cash, which was an offshoot, if you like, of the main Bitcoin. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I would actually even go so far as to argue that Bitcoin Cash is the original Bitcoin, and the thing that everybody's calling Bitcoin today no longer is. And so the things that made me so excited about Bitcoin wasn't the fact that it was called Bitcoin. It was that it allowed you to send and receive any amount of money with anyone, anywhere, instantly, basically for free, and there was nothing that anybody could do to stop it. And all of those characteristics are still alive and well in the form of Bitcoin Cash. They're no longer alive and well in the form of, Bitcoin BTC. And so the mainstream media and the masses around the world are all, a bit in love with what they're calling Bitcoin today. But that's not the same version of Bitcoin that I got in love with in 2011 and made those public bets with the world saying, hey, watch this. This is going to change everything. This is one of the most important inventions in the entire history of humankind. That version of Bitcoin today is called Bitcoin Cash. And the BTC version of Bitcoin, it doesn't have a defining white paper. It doesn't have the defining, ethos or spirit or even end goal. And I'm not nearly as bullish on BTC, Bitcoin, as I am on Bitcoin Cash. But from an investor standpoint alone, Bitcoin BTC has the mind share, and you go up to the average person on the street, have you heard of Bitcoin? And they'll say, yeah, sure, and the news media is reporting on it, but the usefulness that made Bitcoin popular in the first place is gone from the BTC version of Bitcoin. And the usefulness that made Bitcoin popular to begin with is alive and well in Bitcoin Cash. And that's why people like myself, as the CEO of Bitcoin.com, I'm busy promoting Bitcoin Cash. Jihan Wu, the CEO of Bitmain, the largest Bitcoin mining equipment manufacturer in the entire world, and the first person in the entire world to translate the original Bitcoin white paper into Chinese and spread Bitcoin into China. He's also now a giant Bitcoin Cash proponent. And if you look around the ecosystem, almost all of the early adopters and early proponents of Bitcoin, they're busy promoting Bitcoin Cash today. They're no longer promoting the BTC version of Bitcoin. And I think that's a really, really bullish sign for the future of Bitcoin Cash.
So would you be prepared to make a similar bet to the one you made in August 2011? Maybe not for the same multiples, but the one you made in 2011 where you said, Bitcoin would outperform by 100 times. Would you be able to make a similar bet with Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, I think in the long term,
that's not a challenge, by the way.
That's a great question, though, and maybe I should make some sort of a public bet like that. But it's really hard to know because the network effects are incredibly important too. There's a thing called Metcalfe's law, which says that the value of a network increases to the square of the number of nodes or connections on that network. The BTC version of Bitcoin has a great big giant network that's bigger than Bitcoin Cash's network today. And so is Bitcoin Cash going to be able to overcome that? I think so. I think it's likely, but it's not guaranteed. And remember, the dollar or the pound or the euro has a much, 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 much bigger network effect than the BTC version of Bitcoin did to begin with. But BTC's made huge, huge, huge strides over the last couple of years. So am I willing to make such a clear bet like I did the last time? Maybe, but I'd have to think about exactly what the guidelines would be for that. But actions speak louder than words. And with my own money, I used to hold a whole bunch of BTC, and I sold the vast majority of it to buy more BCH, more Bitcoin Cash. And so I think...
Did you do that in one stroke, or was that a gradual thing?
I did a lot of it pretty quickly, and then I've been selling some more over time. And as I've been watching the ecosystem develop, even actually last night as I was going to bed, I sold some more BTC for BCH. And if I had had time today, I would have sold some more. So I'm... dollar cost average is the term for it, even though these aren't dollars involved. But I'm selling it over time. So
we call it pound cost average.
Do you actually say that? Okay. Growing up as an American, everyone said dollar cost averages. So I guess you could say I'm Bitcoin Cash averaging at the moment.
Okay.
So.
And what about the argument that Bitcoin has become the sort of the gold standard, the reserve currency, and all the other altcoins are sort of they've each got their own benefits? And that reserve currency status is what will preserve Bitcoin. And if you like, I mean, there are so many other alternative, Monero or Dash or whoever it is that you can send just as well as you can send Bitcoin Cash. What is it that makes Bitcoin Cash better?
So there's a couple of different things.
There are two questions. So, You're absolutely right. I beg your pardon.
So for the first one, you're absolutely right. Like the BTC version of Bitcoin is viewed as the reserve cryptocurrency. And it's the cryptocurrency that most other cryptocurrencies are traded against currently, and that gives it a huge advantage. But recently we've seen more and more exchanges coming online that are using Bitcoin Cash as the reserve currency or the base currency, including Coinex.com, which, depending on the day, is the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the entire world. Depending on the day, it bounces back and forth between Binance and Coinex. And so that's a pretty darn big deal. That one of the very biggest cryptocurrency exchanges in the entire world is now using Bitcoin Cash as the reserve currency that all the other cryptocurrencies are traded against. In regards to which currencies are the fastest and cheapest and most reliable, Bitcoin Cash has either the largest or the second largest number of merchants accepting it around the world. It's one of the most widely accepted on all the exchanges.
Is that right? It has the second. What would the largest number of merchants be? Bitcoin?
Probably BTC. Yeah. Bitcoin. Yeah. So, and it's we don't know the exact number because there's no central body that keeps track of it, but it's possible already that perhaps Bitcoin Cash has more merchant acceptance in terms of number of websites than BTC does, because every single BitPay merchant, right, which is the largest payment processor in the world for cryptocurrencies, every single BitPay merchant accepts Bitcoin Cash, and the same with Coinbase as well, which is another giant behemoth of a Bitcoin company. So, and it's worth pointing out too that all these companies used to be referred to as Bitcoin companies, and it wasn't until the Bitcoin BTC camp intentionally made the blocks become full, which made the transactions on Bitcoin become slow, expensive, and unreliable, that now people don't refer to these exchanges as Bitcoin exchanges. They refer to them as cryptocurrency exchanges. And they don't refer to Bitcoin wallet companies as Bitcoin wallet companies. They refer to them as cryptocurrency wallet companies or crypto companies. And that's an example of how Bitcoin's first mover advantage was destroyed, whether on purpose or on accident. The fact of the matter is Bitcoin's first mover advantage in the field of cryptocurrencies was destroyed by this idiotic full block high fee policy promoted by people the likes of Blockstream and
why?
and Bitcoin
What's in
Core.
it for them?
I think they didn't study economics. If they studied economics, they'd realize that everything is competing against everything else. So Coca-Cola is competing against Pepsi, is competing against Gatorade, is competing against water, is competing against tea, is competing against, not having anything to drink for the moment at all. And the same is true with cryptocurrencies. Every cryptocurrency is competing against every other cryptocurrency, but they're also competing against PayPal, against Visa, against bank wire transfers, against cash in your pocket. Everything's competing against everything else, whereas you see many of the BTC supporters today, they say that nothing could ever supplant Bitcoin. There's no way that Bitcoin could ever lose out in the competition here. And for anybody that's paying attention, it's already lost the vast majority of its market share in the cryptocurrency.
So you're suggesting there's some complacency in the sort of core development team?
A lot of complacency. And another reoccurring theme I've noticed is that none of these people in the Bitcoin core or BTC supporting camp currently, none of them are actually using it as a currency. None of them use it to buy or sell or pay for things. Whereas the Bitcoin Cash original camp were all the people that were actually trying to use it as a currency to buy and sell things on the internet.
Okay, let me put something to you. I like to look to black markets because black markets have a long history of being the first to embrace a new technology and to make it work on a practical day-to-day basis. And when people turn around to me and they say, oh, Bitcoin, what's it used for? I often point them in the direction of black markets. That's not me advocating black markets necessarily, but it's just me demonstrating the fact that people are using it on a practical day-to-day basis. And I've sort of been through the various dark net sites, or some of them, about, I would say, 7 or 8 in the last couple of days. And purely for research purposes, I stress. And I've noticed that there's a couple that are accepting Bitcoin Cash. There are a couple that accept Litecoin. There are a couple that take Monero. But all of them take Bitcoin. And even when you go onto the sites that do accept Bitcoin Cash, a couple of the site will accept Bitcoin Cash, but it's up to the individual merchants to decide whether they want to accept it or not, and a lot of them don't. Do you have a comment on that, the fact that maybe the black markets haven't embraced it as much as you would like?
I think you're exactly right, though, to point out that the black markets are the early adopters of these sorts of things and can be a really good indicator as to what is going to be happening in the future. And even for myself, the way I heard about Bitcoin for the first time was in reference to the black market called the Silk Road.
Yeah.
And myself personally, I wasn't interested in drugs, but when I heard that people were buying and selling drugs using some sort of online currency to do it, my brain just started tingling all over. I thought, what kind of money are they using for this? This must be the most interesting form of money ever. And so that was what led me down the path of where I am today, being so deeply involved in cryptocurrencies. And I think you're exactly right to do some research on these darknet markets and see what they're using. But a lot of it, though, is a chicken and egg problem, right? People won't use Bitcoin Cash until people are accepting Bitcoin Cash, and people won't start using it, and the other way around. Mm-hmm. So, but the fact that even some are accepting it at all already, and everybody had to retool, and Bitcoin Cash has only been around for a year now, and all these Bitcoin BTC has 9 years of history under its belt, and Monero has several years, and Litecoin has several years, and I think one of the big things that Bitcoin Cash should be working on in the very near future is additional privacy for the protocol, because, like it or not, one of the things that makes money is fungibility. Every piece of money has to be the same as every other piece of money, otherwise it's not good money, and fungibility is just kind of a fancy word for privacy. So I'm looking forward to more privacy tools being built on top of Bitcoin Cash. And when that happens, I think you'll see an even bigger uptake from darknet markets with Bitcoin Cash.
Okay, well, I'm actually involved. I'm setting up a
darknet market?
No, not a darknet market, a privacy investment company. And we've developed this thing called the Cypherpunk Index of Privacy Coins. And there are arguments going on as to whether we should include Bitcoin Cash in the Cypherpunk Index of Privacy Coins. We're arguing about how private it is or it isn't. And so, as speaking as someone who was looking to invest, is putting up, we've got Monero, we've got Dash, we've got Zcash, so we've actually got 3 tiers of privacy coins, with Monero and Zcash top tier, second tier Dash, and third tier Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin. And I think it would be very beneficial for Bitcoin Cash if it could
move up that ranking.
Move up that tier.
I completely agree. And at Bitcoin.com, we're actually funding research on doing that. Not only research, actual implementations of that. So, for example, the Electron Cash wallet now has coin shuffling built right into the wallet, so that puts it about on the same level of privacy as Dash. But I look forward to things that are just as strong as Zcash or Monero in the future. And I'm a big fan of those sorts of things, and look forward to those tools being available on Bitcoin Cash in the near future.
Now, one of the key developers of Bitcoin Cash is a controversial figure. Craig Wright. Only one. Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking specifically of Craig Wright. Can we talk about Craig? Would you be happy to talk about him? Now, obviously, at one stage, you and he got on very well. But I think I read a tweet of yours last week or something that he's blocked you on Twitter or something like that. What's going on there?
I don't really know. So I try to get along well with most people, and Craig, can be a little bit difficult to get along with. But I had dinner with him about a week ago, and I thought it was a nice dinner. I enjoyed the conversation. Craig is incredibly knowledgeable about a whole lot of things in a whole lot of areas, and can also be really difficult to deal with in other areas. So
I will say this: I met him for an hour, and it was possibly the most awkward hour I've ever had in my life. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point.
I completely, as someone who's spent multiple hours with Craig, I completely understand your point there. But oftentimes people that are on, I guess, a different wavelength than many other people, they can be a bit awkward. But those are also the people that come up with these new ideas that really change the course of civilization.
So was he, in your view, one part of Satoshi? You don't have to comment on that if you don't want.
I can comment on it, and the short answer is that I don't know.
Did he not show you some keys at some stage?
He offered to show me some keys at some stage. At the end of the day, though, I don't think it really matters who Satoshi is. It's the underlying characteristics of the system that Satoshi designed that are important. And if it was Craig, that's fine. If it wasn't Craig, that's fine too. And whoever Satoshi is, he invented literally one of the most important things in the history of humankind. And I hope he gets whatever it is he wants out of life. And if he wants to be public and, bask in the limelight, that's fine. And if he wants to remain completely anonymous somewhere else, that's fine too. If he wants to straddle the middle line, it's his prerogative to do so. And I'm not going to try and disrupt what Satoshi wants.
Let me just chuck in my 2p, if you don't mind. I did probably more research than anyone into who Satoshi was when I was writing my book way back when. I got slightly obsessed with it. And I was doing all sorts of linguistic comparisons and so on. And Craig Wright is not someone I even considered was Satoshi at the time of writing the book. I came to the conclusion that it was Nick Szabo. But I've sort of looked at Craig's stuff since. And one of the things that characterized Satoshi was his understatement and his calmness. In everything he wrote, there was this kind of calm quality.
Craig does not have that.
He doesn't have that. He does not have that at all. And in addition... but it's Dave Kleiman did have that. And in addition, also Craig's prose doesn't tally with Satoshi's prose. There are some inconsistencies there. So if Craig was Satoshi... Now, but Craig does have the knowledge at that required intersection between economics and computer programming and libertarian thought and being a cipher. But that sort of intersection of knowledge that Satoshi has to have had. Which, by the way, Nick Szabo has to have had as well. But Nick Szabo's prose does tally with Satoshi's, but he denies it. And Satoshi did say in his white paper electronic cash, whereas BitGold, the precursor, was more designed less to be cash.
Gold.
Exactly, was designed to be a reserve currency. So if you like, what Bitcoin has become is more like Nick Szabo's vision, even if he wasn't the original programmer. So I kind of buy into the theory that Dave Kleiman wrote the posts. By the way, it's really hard to find stuff that Dave Kleiman's written to compare their two posts. He's usually written it with somebody else. But if he was Satoshi, it was two and maybe even a third of them.
So speaking of a third, have you followed any of the recent developments in regards to a man named Phil Wilson in Australia?
No.
So just yesterday or the day before, there's a 7.5 hour long interview with this Phil Wilson character that was just posted on YouTube. I'm 3 hours through the 7.5 hour interview, but I found it incredibly interesting. And 7.5 hours, granted, is a very, very long time, but I'm at the time of this recording, I'm 3 hours through the 7 hour, and it's been very entertaining the entire way through, very interesting. And he lays out a very, very compelling case as to how the three parts of Satoshi were Phil Wilson, Craig Wright, and Dave Kleiman. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but if you want to play the Who's Satoshi game, Phil Wilson's another person to look into.
Thanks very much for the lead.
And this
I've
is all
written
just
the book.
yeah.
I've written the book, and I don't want to go there ever again. But yeah, it gets kind of addictive. But I completely agree. By the way, it really doesn't matter because it's ultimately it was the initiator, but ultimately it became an open source project, and there are so many different people who've contributed to it. So it really does not matter,
right.
Except for the fact that there's 1.2. Yeah, it is kind of fun. So let's talk about. We were talking about black markets there, and you've been a big champion of Ross Ulbricht. Let's talk about Ross Ulbricht. For those of you that don't know, Ross was the guy, the original founder of the original Silk Road. And one of the lines I like to use, by the way, is what Bitcoin has done for black markets, online black markets. It's enabled them to exist where previously they couldn't exist because of the traceability of money. And so effectively, Bitcoin has done to the international drugs trade what the internet did to media and publishing, which is quite a nice analogy.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
And it has. I mean, you've got all these kind of guys with their international monopolies suddenly being subverted by small merchants selling stuff online much more safely, much better quality. It's wonderful.
Delivered right to your door.
Yeah,
or so I hear.
By the postman. So let's talk about Ross Ulbricht, who was like the pace setter, if you like, the trailblazer.
Yeah, the innovator, right? If you think about it, it was one of the Silk Road was probably the most successful startup ever, right? In the course of about a year, it went from nothing to being one of the biggest marketplaces in the entire world, selling all sorts of things to all sorts of people.
More successful than Amazon.
Yeah, probably more, and certainly in a shorter time scale. So from that perspective alone, it's pretty darn amazing, and I think he should be celebrated as an entrepreneur. And if you read the terms of service from the site, anything that's sole purpose was to be able to harm somebody wasn't allowed for sale on the site. So, and as you know, a longtime libertarian myself, I feel very strongly. I own myself. I own my own body. If I want to drink water, coffee, or alcohol or crack cocaine, my body belongs to me, and so I have the absolute right to do that. And it doesn't matter what words politicians get together and write down on a piece of paper. Writing down words on a piece of paper and calling it a law does not alter morality. And if you look at human history, the greatest atrocities in human history were all completely legal. Rounding up Jews by the millions and executing them, completely legal. Slavery in the United States, completely legal. All these horrible things throughout human history, politicians got together, wrote down words on a piece of paper and called it a law and said, oh, we took something that normally would be an evil act, and now because we made it a law, it's considered a good act, and it's no problem, and we have the right to do it. That's a bunch of nonsense, and I don't buy into any of that. And
But you're complaining about the rules of the game, and you're complaining about the game, if you like, and you're complaining about the rules of the game. And by the way, I share your view. You'll share your libertarian views. Perhaps not. I've described myself as a minarchist, and you're probably like a full-blown anarchist.
Do you know what the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist is?
Go on, tell me.
About 6 months.
Very good. But anyway, leaving that aside, he did break the law, and the law is clear. Even if the law, I mean, drugs laws are one of the most dumbest, most harmful pieces of legislation ever enacted, but nevertheless they are the law, and he's broken the law. And the problem he has is that they are trying to set a precedent. They're saying, look, this is what happens. They've given him the harshest possible treatment they could possibly have given him because they don't want anyone else doing this. The fact that within a week of the Silk Road closing down, 20 copycat sites had emerged is neither here nor there. But so how do you address that? Because your criticism was with the law.
Yeah, my criticism is with the law. You're right, and I think the law is immoral and the law is wrong, and the politicians that enacted it are wrong. And I'm looking forward to using technology to undermine their ability to enforce those sorts of immoral laws.
But how do we get Ross out in the meantime? Apart from giving
him
money.
I was hoping you had an answer for that. I don't know.
Okay.
In the short term, I don't know. In the longer term, I think we can use technology to undermine politicians from enforcing these immoral laws. And hopefully within our lifetime, we'll be able to get Ross out and every single other nonviolent drug offender that's in prison.
Yeah.
And there's another, longtime friend of mine is in federal prison in Colorado right now for growing marijuana. And he's
in Colorado?
In Colorado, a state where marijuana is completely legal, but it's still legal at the federal level. So he's being held in a federal prison in Colorado for having grown marijuana. And it's just absolutely just disgusting.
Imagine how much lower your taxes would be if drugs were legal.
And imagine how much, people use drugs because they like them and they make them feel happy. That's why people drink alcohol or wine, and that's why people smoke marijuana, and that's why people use other drugs, because they like them and make them feel happy. And sometimes people get out of control with alcohol and start fights or crash their car into something, but like, you punish them for crashing their car into something or for starting the fight, not for the actual consumption of the alcohol. And the same logic should be applied to these other drugs, because just because some people might handle them irresponsibly doesn't mean that that people shouldn't be allowed to have them, because they own themselves and their lives belong to them and my life belongs to me.
What's the future of libertarianism? At the moment, I see there's like a battle is brewing. And it's not so much between left and right, it's between authoritarian and libertarian. And it's between tax and economic freedom. And, it's a bit like, the Lord of the Rings or something. You know that this great battle between the forces of good and the forces of Mordor is coming. And like the forces are being assembled. And on the bad guy's side, they've got the law, they've got the army, they've got all the
lots of men with guns.
Lots of men with guns and so on. But on the good guy's side, there's technology. But how do the good guys win? What's the future for libertarianism?
So another thinker who's really influenced my view of the world is David Friedman, the son of the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman. And in the late 90s, David Friedman wrote a book called Future Imperfect that I really found to be fascinating. He predicted a lot of the things that we're seeing happen today in the advent of cryptocurrencies and online marketplaces, where you're using public key cryptography to verify your online identity that's completely separate from your real world identity. And the question he asked in this book is, are these new technologies that are coming down the line, at the end of the day, are they going to wind up being liberating for the individual, or are they going to wind up being tools that the state is able to use to control individuals even more than they're being controlled today? And we don't know the answer to that question, but I would urge all these technologists and libertarian-leaning people out there to work on the technologies that are wind up being a net liberating force for individuals, rather than another tool for oppression and control by governments. But we don't know, and we can't stop it, right? You can't stop the evolution of technology. All we can do is try and hope to guide it in a direction that allows people to have more control of their own lives. But some of the things are really, really terrifying. Some of these biotechnology stuff, people are going to be able to make, a virus that kills maybe not even only a specific race, but a specific person, right? If they get a DNA sample, pretty soon they'll be able to construct a virus that'll kill only the person that they have that DNA from. And that's some scary stuff that's coming in.
That is terrifying.
How do you regulate that? How do you stop that? And is it stoppable at all? And I don't know. And it is terrifying, right? Because there's lots of people that are mad at lots of people on the internet. And
I'll say.
Yeah, so be careful who gets a copy of your DNA as well, right? And there was an interesting case, and of course I'm glad they caught the guy, but they caught the way they caught him is pretty scary. There was a serial killer in the Los Angeles area. And I think he was busy. He killed, 30 women in the 70s or something. It was, long before my time. But the way they caught this person is some of these DNA testing websites where you can get your genetic 23andMe type of thing.
Yeah.
Some people had sent in their DNA to get their genetic profile done, and apparently this company was turning over all the information directly to the police. And they had some DNA samples that when it came in, they knew, because they had DNA from the serial killer, but they didn't know who it was. When the DNA samples came in, they knew that the killer was related to these other people by blood. So then they looked at who the family members of these other people who they had the DNA and their ID with, and then they were able to narrow down who this guy was. And of course, I'm glad they caught a serial killer. But
talk about a violation of privacy.
Right. The way they caught him isn't a very, very pleasant way. It's rather frightening the way they caught him.
I have 3 letters to say to that. OMG. Right. Let's talk about... I want to ask you 2 more questions before we wrap up, if that's okay, Roger. But the first one is, you did some time yourself way back when, and I think that might have formulated your own anti-state views. Is that absolutely right? Oh, here we go. I'm being passed a red card, and it says US Department of Justice, And there is a very young-looking Roger Ver in the photograph, looking a little bit like a young Cristiano Ronaldo, if you know who Cristiano Ronaldo is. I think he's the richest sportsman in the world, but he's a football player for Real Madrid.
He must be very handsome in that case.
But well done for not knowing who he is. And it says inmate. There we go. Wonderful. So tell me about that.
So I just...
It's got your own barcode as well.
It has my own barcode, and it says in big giant black letters, inmate, right there, and it has my Federal Bureau of Prisons number. And I hadn't looked at this card for 15 years or something, and then just recently I had some of my things shipped from the U.S. to the United States, from the United States to Japan rather, and it had all the mail that I had received during the time I was in prison, and this card was in there, and it definitely brought back a lot of memories. So I put it in my wallet, and I've been carrying it around with me for the last couple of weeks, just as an interesting. Definitely an interesting conversation starter for sure. So I spent some time in federal prison. I sold firecrackers on eBay back when eBay had a guns and ammo section, and it was perfectly legal to sell these sorts of things on eBay, and it wasn't any problem for anyone at all except for myself, who also made the mistake of combining that with also running for political office as a libertarian in the United States. And I called the FBI and ATF a bunch of jackbooted thugs and murderers in reference to all the children they burnt to death in a church in Waco, Texas in the mid-90s. And, people that are, maybe 40 years old or older at this point will probably remember when that happened in the United States. And the parents were definitely some religious kooks. But just because the kids' parents are religious kooks doesn't mean that you should burn to death all of them, the kids and the parents alike, in their church. I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 80 people were literally burnt to death
Who
in a church. The ATF and FBI.
What's the ATF?
I'm sorry, the ATF, for those that don't know, is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is another.
So why did they burn these people?
The disobedience is the short answer. So they surrounded their church and telling them to come out, but were shooting up at the same time. There's some interesting documentaries that
But
people
you can't
can
just burn a building, surely.
Well, when you're the government, it means you never have to say you're sorry for anything. So I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 25 kids that were less than 12 years old were burnt to death in the church, and I think it was about 80 people total.
And this was not far from where you...
This was in the United States. This happened in Texas, and I grew up in California.
Okay.
But the U.S. is a big country.
Yeah,
news of that sort of thing makes its way around. And
there
was a standoff of maybe a month or two with the FBI and the ATF. But there's I think one of the documentaries is Waco, the Rules of Engagement, and there's some really interesting information in some documentaries about this sort of thing. But it's clear, like, even if the parents were total nutcases and doing things that were illegal, burning to death a bunch of kids that are less than 12 years old is not acceptable, plain and simple. And so for saying these sorts of things and speaking out against it, I wound up becoming the only person in the entire country to be prosecuted for selling these firecrackers without a permit. Even though the company that I was buying them from had no permit, the manufacturer had no permit, dozens of other resellers across the entire United States.
So you're just buying them at one price and selling them at another,
Exactly.
basically?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So, which is what every business does, right?
So they did the same to you they're doing to Ross Ulbricht, but to a lesser extent. They just made an example of you.
Yeah. Well, what Ross Ulbricht did, I think, was much more clearly illegal than what I did. And not that I think he should have gotten the punishment that he deserved, but for me, I was literally buying them from one website and selling them on another website. And even while I was in prison, other websites were selling the exact same product with no permit. And my actual charge was dealing explosives without a permit. The crime was doing it without a permit. The crime wasn't selling explosives. The crime was doing it without a permit. And these other companies were selling the exact same product without a permit. The manufacturer was doing it without a permit. And I was the only person in the entire nation to be prosecuted for doing it without a permit.
How old were you?
19 years old when I was selling these.
What was that like, being in jail when you were 19 years old?
And so the gears of injustice grind very slowly. And so actually I went into prison when I was 22 and got out when I was 23. And then the day I was allowed to leave the country, I left the United States and haven't lived there since.
So that informed your decision to leave?
Oh, it's yes.
Is that weird, not kind of having a country? Because for a bit you will have not had a country, or does it...
Oh, well, I wasn't living in the United States. Then it took another decade plus before I actually renounced my U.S. citizenship.
Okay.
But philosophically, I think the whole idea of citizenship is a bunch of nonsense.
Sure.
It's just you're
the
taught
nation state is a modern construct.
Yeah, you're just taught from a very young age that that's how the world works, and it always has, and it always should. Even though it hasn't always worked that way, and it certainly shouldn't. But within our narrow purview of the time our modern age, that's how people view the world.
Did you kind of get beaten up and stuff in prison? I mean, I know you do martial arts, so you can kind of look after yourself. But...
Well, the martial arts started much after prison.
Okay.
And actually, when I got out of prison, I didn't realize, I'm about 5 feet 10 inches tall, which I guess they use here in the UK as well.
Yeah.
And
thank goodness we don't suffer from the tyranny of metric measurements.
And I went in at 155 pounds. I think you might use stones over here. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, we do.
Anyhow,
that's about 65 kilos.
Yeah, about 65 kilos. I'm fine with kilos if you guys are fine with that. So I went in at around 65
Would have been about
kilos.
9 or 10 stone, something like that.
And then I didn't realize it, but like the food in prison was so horrible that I didn't even want to touch it, let alone eat it. And basically I just spent all day, every day reading books in my bunk bed. But by the time I got out, I had lost a whole bunch of weight, and I probably came out somewhere in the ballpark of like 55 kilos or 50 kilos, like really, really skinny. I didn't realize that it had happened. And the first thing my friends said when they saw me, when they got out, I said, "Roger, you lost a lot of weight." And I wasn't a big guy to begin with when I went in. And they started making jokes that most people go into prison, they come out, real strong and buffed. But I lost a bunch of weight while I was in prison.
And did you have your own cell, or were you in a dormitory? Or
so in the first maybe a month or so, I was in a big giant dormitory of a couple hundred people, and it's really loud, and you have to wear earplugs to sleep because everything echoes off.
People are farting and snoring and all that stuff.
And all that stuff, and worse, and occasional fights here and there, not too much. Like where I was a medium security facility, so there wasn't a huge amount of fighting. And most people would think, well, were you scared of the other inmates? And no, absolutely not. The people you have to be scared of are the guards. Those guards are there day after day, year after year. And a lot of them are really, really bored. And the way they solve their boredom is to just harass different inmates. And you have to, and even to this day, if I hear keys jingling, it really gives me a uneasy feeling, because the guards, as they would walk around the prison, they would let their keychain jingle to kind of warn the inmates that they're coming, so that the inmates can hide whatever it is that they're up to. And people are giving each other tattoos and doing all sorts of stuff that they're not supposed to be doing. And the guards, most of the time, they don't want to deal with that sort of thing, so they let their keys jingle to give notice to the inmates to hide whatever you're up to, so that way the guard doesn't have to deal with it either. But when you hear the keys jingling, you know that trouble is coming. And even to this day, I've been out almost, coming up on 20 years, and it still gives me a really bad feeling whenever I hear keys jingling to this very day. So,
haunting stuff. Roger, let me ask you one last question, or one last subject. And that is, like, a lot of people have had to deal with this. And that is, I suppose we can call it Bitcoin regret. And that's people who've known about Bitcoin for a long time. They got involved in it. It sort of happened to me a little bit in that I had some coins early on that were stolen, and I never bought back the coins that were stolen. It happens to maybe the people who were involved in MT Gox who had their coins stolen. There was a guy I read about who, was very evangelical about Bitcoin, and he mined, and I think he had like 7,500 coins, and then they got stolen. And there's the other guy whose wife threw away his hard drive, and he's been walking around the rubbish dumps of South Wales trying to find his. How do people like that, who, like, the opportunity that Bitcoin was, it's not even a once in a lifetime opportunity, it's almost a once in a generation, where you can turn
maybe even once ever,
where you could turn literally £100 into £1 million or more. And many people have, and many people have done that by accident. They lost their phone and then they found their phone again. They lost their keys and they recovered their keys. But what about the people? No, but for every kind of wonderful story, there's someone who got hacked. There's someone who sold his coins too early. There's someone who lost his coins. There's someone who lost his keys. I think it's something like 15 to 20% of Bitcoins have been lost. How do those guys reconcile themselves? Even the guys who just knew about it and for whatever reason, their lives were too busy, just didn't get involved in it and have missed the bubble. What do those people do now? What do you have to say to those people, apart from ha ha ha?
There certainly will be no ha 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 from me on that, but it's certainly high risk and it's not guaranteed, but I think we have a bit of a second shot here in the form of Bitcoin Cash, because Bitcoin Cash has all the underlying characteristics that made Bitcoin popular in the first place and made the price of Bitcoin skyrocket. Bitcoin no longer has those characteristics. Bitcoin Cash does. So that's why I've been selling. And right now today, you can get about 11 Bitcoin Cash for every one Bitcoin BTC. That's a pretty darn good ratio there, I think. And even if you're more bullish on BTC than BCH, Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, I don't think that there's 11 to 1 more reasons to be more bullish on the BTC version of Bitcoin than on the Bitcoin Cash version. So I think you have a second shot with Bitcoin Cash, and that's what I've done with most of my own Bitcoin, is converted it to Bitcoin Cash. And how
many Bitcoins? What was your original investment into Bitcoin? $25,000 was it?
Yeah, my first wire was for $25,000 to Mt. Gox, and they were about $1 a piece at the time. Did you take them out of Mt. Gox? Yeah, of course. And the advice has been the same from day one and to today. Always hold your cryptocurrency yourself or in a wallet where you control the private keys. Because if you entrust somebody else to hold them for you, bad things can happen. And just ask every previous Mt. Gox customer. And I didn't lose any Bitcoins myself in Mt. Gox because I learned my lesson the hard way previously with another event that a lot of people won't have even heard of at this point within the Bitcoin ecosystem. But there was another one called Bitcoinica. And I think a couple 100,000 Bitcoins were stolen from Bitcoinica and hacked. And I lost, I think it was 28,000 Bitcoins of my own in Bitcoinica. And granted, the price at the time was around $5 each. So it was still
grand.
It was still 125 grand, which has made ever since then, every time the price of Bitcoin has gone up, it's been a bit bittersweet because I'm reminded of those 28,000 Bitcoins and what they could have been today. And today, I don't even want to think about
it's £500 million. Half a billion. Well, no, sorry. No, it's a quarter of
a billion pounds. Yeah. Not bad.
Dollars, right? I mean, quarter of a billion. But I mean, I'd settle for that. What are you doing now, Roger? What are your projects? What have you got going on?
So my big project now is Bitcoin.com that we're using to build the tools to empower individuals to have complete control over their own money all over the world. And so the Bitcoin.com wallet is the core tenet of that allows people, just like in the earliest days of Bitcoin, to now send and receive any amount of money with anyone, anywhere in the world, instantly, basically for free, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. And the Bitcoin.com wallet, of course, each individual is holding their private keys themselves. Even at Bitcoin.com, we don't have the ability to freeze anybody's account or block them from sending or receiving that money. And so we want to build the tools to enable individuals all over the world to have control over their own lives. That's the name of the game for me.
It's a fantastic thing. There's an enormous boom coming in the world. I mean, just you describing that, the murder in that church. If people had had smartphones then, and they'd videoed it, if people had had smartphones in World War I when they were going over the top in the trenches, the war would have stopped. The smartphone is a fantastic tool of bringing truth to power. And limiting power. And the same thing will happen as more and more people get their smartphones in the third world. The unbanked will suddenly be part of a new financial system, and that is a wonderful opportunity. And I'm sure that's a trend that you're looking to help and work in your favour.
The listeners can't see it on the podcast, but I'm grinning from ear to ear as you explain that. This is going to empower every individual on the planet to improve their situation.
Roger Ver, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and to talk to our listeners. I wish you all the best. Bitcoin Cash Evangelist, Bitcoin Cash Jesus, Roger Ver, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.